Kia ora, everyone. It's wonderful to be here. I'm Maggie Tuckle, the Chair Commissioner at the Mental Health and Wellbeing Commission, or the MHWC. Thank you all for coming along to our session today. We look forward to sharing information about the guidance that we have developed for the mental health and wellbeing principles. But first, I'll hand over to Jackie Gibson, who is the Carer Commissioner at the MHWC, to do the acknowledgement of country.
Thank you, Maggie. Welcome, everyone. My name is Jacqueline Gibson. I'm a proud Yamati woman, and I am the Lived Experience Carer Commissioner. I would like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation as the traditional custodians on the lands on which this webinar is being held. We recognise their continuing connection to land, water, sea, sky, and community, and we pay our respects to elders past and present. We want to also acknowledge that Victoria's statewide treaty bill in 2025 was passed in November.
Next slide, please. I would also like to recognise all those with lived experience of mental health challenges, distress and alcohol and other drug use. The many wonderful people who work hard to change the system and put an end to trauma and disconnection, stigma and discrimination.
Today, next slide, please. So here's an overview of today's session. We'll begin with the Mental Health and Wellbeing Principles of the Mental Health and Wellbeing Act of 2022 and why they are important for consumers, families, carers and kin. Then we will talk through our guidance, the process that we use to develop the guidance to ensure that lived experience was embedded at every stage and that guidance meets services needs. The overview is to introduce you to the structure and content of the guidance. This includes the legal framework and what's in each principle. We'll explain how the Commission supports services to comply with the principles through our complaint process. We will show you where the implementation resources are and how to find guidance on our website. Just a few housekeeping items as well. This webinar will run for approximately 40 minutes. This session is being recorded and we will share the recording in due time. In the meantime, we will also email out this slide deck to everyone who is attending the webinar. If you have questions, please use the chat. We will address them during the Q&A segment. If we can't get to your question today, we'll take them on notice. If you experience technical difficulties, try refreshing your browser or reconnecting. We also have a survey to hear your thoughts on today's session, and we will also send you a link to the survey for feedback about the guidance, summary, websites and implementation tools in the next month.
Next slide, please. The Act contains 13 mental health and wellbeing principles. Mental health and wellbeing service providers and other bodies, including the MHWC, must give the principles proper consideration and make all reasonable efforts to comply with them in their actions and decisions. I think we're all pretty familiar with the principles and know that we all need to comply with them. The guidance helps us to put these principles into practice and embed them in our everyday work. The principles support the primary objective of the Act, to achieve the highest attainable standard of mental health and wellbeing for every Victorian. The Commission has a function under the Act to issue guidance about how the mental health and wellbeing principles apply to actions, decisions and practice under the Act. The guidance aims to support the implementation of the principles and continuous improvement of Victoria's mental health and wellbeing services, and in doing so to improve the experiences of people accessing them. As commissioners with lived experience, Jackie and I are very proud to have been co-sponsors of this project. Next slide, please. The principles support a mental health and wellbeing service system that values and listens to people's preferences and uphold people's rights. They reinforce that every person accessing a service deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. The principles support care that is inclusive and culturally safe, acknowledging that people's identities and experiences shape how they engage with services and what supports they find meaningful. The principles also recognise the value of consumer leadership and partnership in creating system-wide change.
Next slide, please.
Along with consumers, the principle for family and carers experience is important. The principle recognises the significant and important role of carers, families and supporters, and our right to have our voices heard. The principle recognises the importance of acknowledging and valuing families, carers and supporters, recognising them as partners in care and decision makers. The principles recognise the role of carers in supporting consumers during their treatment and care. For example, supporting consumers to make decisions and advocating for them, while also recognising carers' own needs and perspectives. In exploring the carer-related principles, the guidance encourages collaboration, open communication, and supporting services to involve carers in ways that are respectful, appropriate, and centred on the person's preferences and rights. Importantly, the guidance highlights ways to support carers, including support for their own well-being, as they navigate the system alongside the person that they care for. Ultimately, the principles support a system grounded in trust, respect, and shared purpose, where carers, supporters, and kin feel included, heard, supported, and empowered to contribute to care decisions. I'll now hand over to Ali Payne, our Senior Consumer Advisor, who is the project lead for the development of this guidance.
Next slide, please. Hi everyone, I'm Ali Payne, Project Lead and Senior Consumer Advisor here at the Mental Health and Wellbeing Commission. It's lovely to have you here today. Today I'm going to walk you through what the guidance is, why and how it was developed, and how you can access and use it. On this slide you can see we have two documents, the full guidance, which is from intent to impact, and the summary. The guidance provides practical steps services can apply at all levels, from leadership and governance to workforce practice. The guidance is supported by the guidance summary and implementation tools that have all been developed and published to our website. The link will be posted now in the chat. Each has a different purpose. The guidance gives detailed information about how to comply with the Act's requirements and about applying each principle in practice. The guidance is intended to support embedding the principles in practice at a systemic and individual level. The summary is primarily intended to support services and the workforce to understand the actions they can or must take in daily practice to comply with the principles. And in both you'll see there are book icons, visual, to show when it's a must. We've also developed implementation resources such as the Leadership Self-Assessment Checklist. The checklist will help services identify gaps and where services are strong in their approach in implementing the principles. Other resources include a training matrix, and also we've mapped the Your Experience of Service and Care Experience Service survey questions to the principles, because that's a rich source of data that when you're reviewing those you can actually see how much they align to the principles. We're currently finalising a scenario with multiple intersecting principles about the right to communicate, and we are working on mapping the principles to the National Safety and Quality Health Standards. So it's coming soon, but not today. Next slide, please. So this shows how we've embedded lived experience throughout the project, being sponsored by Jackie, the Care and Consumer Commissioner, or Jackie and Maggie, sorry, a bit informal. And also we had our General Manager and Manager on the steering committee. We had consumers and carers on the steering. And we have also me as project lead, and all the members of the experience team have been in the working group alongside our other amazing colleagues. We've developed 3 different networks. We had a service network, and that has over 24 mental health and wellbeing services where they're asked to nominate lived experience leadership to join that network. And we also, service reps nominated who they were, and they were able to give us amazing input to make sure that the information is practical, useful and accessible. And we really wanted to capture those perspectives from lived and living experience and the clinical teams and the quality improvement teams. And it included showing how services are currently putting their principles in practice, identifying any barriers and challenges, and highlighting examples of good practice. So that's a visual representation of the project's governance. Can we please have the next slide? And this is about how we developed the guidance, which started with a massive questionnaire. Thank you to all the services and sector partners who completed something which was like, I think, a 69 question questionnaire. And it took a lot to analyse, which we shared all the results of the analysis with all services and sector partners after we did all that. So it's a big shout out to the people who did that analysis. And then from that, we were able to draft early drafts of the principles of dignity and autonomy, least restrictive, supported decision making, and dignity of risk. The process changed a little bit because we did have the budget announcements in May, which reduced the resources we were able to use to continue with the work. So what we did do is based on the feedback from the first group of principles, we used all of that amazing feedback to commence drafting guidance on the remaining principles, which including seeking advice on specific principles such as cultural safety, wellbeing of young people, etc. Etc. sounds ridiculous, but anyway. We then tested drafts with a smaller group of services and sector partners who really provided detailed and nuanced feedback, often with a really short time frame to help finalise the guidance, survey and implementation tools. So I'd just like to thank all of our service partners, they're all amazing, for your significant contribution, and to our sector partners, VMIAC, Tandem, the Office
Apologies, there seems to be an audio issue. We will resume
of Health
soon.
Lived
Yes.
Sorry, sorry everyone, it just decided to cut out on me because I'm in the building. Sorry, it's just back to thanking the Department of Lived Experience Advisory Hub, and to our consulting partners from First Nation organisations including Aboriginal Justice League, Victorian Aboriginal Legal Service, Bendigo and District Aboriginal Cooperative, the Commissioner for LGBTIQA+ communities, the Commissioner for Children and Young People, Family Safety Victoria, Foundation House, Urella, Nexus, and there are other organisations, I just can't remember them. We couldn't have completed this guidance without your advice, expertise and assistance, and we're deeply grateful. Next slide, please. This is about the table of contents. So we've managed to reduce what was probably about a 30-page table of contents into one page. So there's basically 4 parts to the guidance. That's part 1, as shown on the screen, is about the introduction, legal requirements, human rights, and how you can put the principles in practice. And then part 2 is all about the specific guidance on each principle. And we've based that all on what you've told us. And then part 3 is supporting services to comply with the principles. So that's a lot. And now I'm going to hand over to our General Counsel, Stephanie Couchy, to talk about what giving proper consideration and making all reasonable efforts to comply with the principles look like in practice. Over to you, Steph.
Thanks, Ali. I get the dry bits. As Ali mentioned, I'm Stephanie Couchy, General Counsel of the Commission, and I'm going to talk about what it means to give proper consideration and to make all reasonable efforts to comply with the principles. As you all know, the previous Mental Health Act did contain a set of principles, many of them similar to the principles in the current Act. However, the Mental Health and Wellbeing Act 2022 sets a higher standard of accountability for service providers in regards to the principles than the previous Mental Health Act 2014. So rather than simply having regard to the principles, services must now make all reasonable efforts to comply with them in practice and give proper consideration to them in making decisions. So what does this mean? Mental health and wellbeing service providers must make all reasonable efforts to comply with the principles when exercising a function under the Act. Basically, exercising a function generally refers to taking actions. It's the things that you do. To exercise a function means to act in a way that is authorised, required or permitted by the Act. Now, some mental health and wellbeing service providers have functions that are outlined clearly in the Act, but for most, functions are not always explicitly outlined. Generally, the functions of a mental health and wellbeing service may include the provision of mental health care, treatment and support, education, training and research that a service undertakes in relation to mental health and wellbeing, quality, safety and innovation activities and obligations that they undertake in relation to mental health and wellbeing, administrative obligations such as reporting, for example, to the Minister or the Health Secretary, and any other requirements that may be part of a funding arrangement. Now, proper consideration, on the other hand, is a mandatory process of deliberation when making a decision under the Act. This means embedding the principles into daily work, into decision-making, policies, practices, and service delivery, so that they genuinely guide how services operate. Proper consideration under the Act is the same standard as proper consideration of human rights under the Charter of Human Rights and Responsibilities Act 2006. Now, we've had the Charter for almost 20 years now, so service providers, who will also be public authorities under the Charter, should be familiar with the concept of giving proper consideration and taking a rights-based approach to decisions and actions. These obligations, the requirement to consider rights under the Charter and the requirement to consider principles under the Act, work alongside of each other. Importantly, proper consideration doesn't mean that every decision needs legal advice or a complex process. It simply means going beyond a token consideration or a tick box approach. Decision makers must genuinely think about how the principles apply in each circumstance. Proper consideration means that you have to consider and balance competing or opposing interests and come to a decision that is proportionate to the importance of the principle or principles being affected and is reasonable when considering competing interests. In urgent situations, proper consideration may look different from situations where there is more time to make a decision. In urgent circumstances, for example, when necessary to avoid a serious risk of harm to the consumer or another person, it may be necessary to rely on known information and existing procedures. This highlights the importance of ensuring the procedures are informed by the principles and that all reasonable efforts are made to understand and document a consumer's views and preferences at all points in care. So, for example, if a decision is made in an urgent situation, it should be revisited in more detail later in the person's care and treatment when the urgency has passed. Now, importantly, this guidance will not tell you the right answer to specific scenarios. What it will do is help you work through them to make sure you're giving proper consideration to the principles and making all reasonable efforts to comply. What is important is showing how you've done this. So documenting reasons for decisions and what actions have been taken is really important. Next slide, please. So the slide that you see here comes straight out of the guidance. In the guidance, we've included a section outlining the steps that we think that you should take that are involved in giving proper consideration to and making all reasonable efforts to comply with the principles. So you'll see there's a 5-step process flowchart, and we've also included a detailed scenario in the guidance applying that process, showing how it can be applied to both a consumer journey and a systemic change. The process can also be used to assess whether service providers' actions or decisions complied with their obligations. So just briefly to step through this process, the first thing is to identify and understand the relevant principles. So which principles are going to be relevant to this particular decision or action? Not all principles will be relevant in all circumstances. Once you've identified which principles apply, do I understand what they mean in general terms? So, for example, do I understand what cultural safety means for an Indigenous person in this situation? Do I understand what dignity of risk might mean for somebody in an inpatient unit? Once you've identified and understood the relevant principles, you have to think who's going to be affected and how that how that is going to affect them. So what rights or entitlements might be limited. You then need to consider what other competing interests or obligations might be affected. So, for example, you might have a conflict between the views of the consumer and the views of their family members or carers. You might have occupational health and safety concerns. You need to consider how these competing interests or obligations intersect or conflict. Once you've identified who will be impacted and how, you then have to do a bit of a proportionality analysis. So you balance and weigh the competing interests and principles. So it's really important to have a sense of the relevance of the principle proportionate to the action or decision. What is going to be the likely impact on persons affected if there are going to be any rights or entitlements limited? What are the consequences going to be of making or not making a decision? And importantly, how have I worked with a person to understand the impacts of different options on them in their views? Then, of course, your final step is to make a decision. And importantly here, as I've mentioned, it's really important that you document the reasons for your decision that show how proper consideration has been given in each circumstance or how reasonable efforts have been made to comply. As I mentioned, there's a really detailed scenario of Alex in the guidance that steps through this process in detail, each of those 5 steps. And I highly recommend that you take a look at that scenario to get a better understanding of how this works in practice, because I know just speaking about it in the abstract can be very dry, but working through that scenario really does help to understand how these are applied in practice. Thanks, that's all for me. I'll hand back to Ali.
I'll unmute myself. Next slide, please. So what is in each principle? So this particular, hang on, I'm just going to refer to my speaking notes because otherwise I go off track. So what do the Act and relevant guidance say? So this specifically explores for each principle its background, the relevant national standards and chief psychiatrist guidelines. We have section 2 in each principle, which talks about what human rights relate to this principle, which connects to the broader human rights framework, including the Charter. For example, rights such as equality, privacy and freedom from discrimination directly connect to each principle. In section 3 and 4, this is really important. That's why we have it higher up in the guidance for each principle. It's how consumer and carers experience this principle, because when they are given proper consideration and making reasonable efforts, these statements are really helpful because they're actually enlivening what the principles should mean and how people may hopefully experiencing them. And then treating teams in practice is in section 5, and that talks about this. You'll see a lot of book icons here that will tell you the must-dos and the good practices, and they're all bookmarked and interlinked. And anyway, I'll talk about more of that later. The good practices have been included. Thank you for all the virtual networks who have shared those with us. Reflective questions in the section 6 of each principle has specific questions for services to reflect on or suggestions that you can use. A scenario has been developed for each principle, but these are not as detailed as Alex. Alex really takes you through the 5-step framework. These are just showing how considering the principles, using the principles can actually have significant impact, even though it may seem small actions. And now I've got the lights have gone off where I'm sitting, so just excuse me while I suddenly go dark. I'm in a weird room and I don't know how to turn them back on. They are taken from real examples. They are de-identified. And then the more information section, that has all the links to all the resources that we will have used in developing the guidance on a particular principle. I'm going to hand over now because I've just briefly talked about part 2. Don't worry, I'll show it all later. But now I'll hand over to Garda Marr, our Assistant Commissioner of Complaints and Resolutions. Thank you, Garda. And next slide, please.
Hello, everyone. As Ali mentioned, I'm Garda Marr. I'm the Assistant Commissioner for Complaints at the Mental Health and Wellbeing Commission, and so glad to be here today to celebrate this really amazing work that the Lived Experience team has led with the support of many of you here in attendance today. So thank you all. Complaints. So complaints are the window through which we receive information about experiences from consumers, carers and families who, by sharing these experiences when receiving care and treatment at public mental health and wellbeing services in Victoria, they provide us with a great opportunity to engage with the services to understand more about the perspective of consumers, carers and families, about gaps that exist in practice where people are receiving a service from a public health and mental health and wellbeing service. When facilitating these complaints to services, our approach is how issues raised intersect with the principles. Whether that is through each individual complaint that we receive, or whether this is through any systemic issues that may be informed by complaints, as well as other mechanisms that we have across the Commission's teams. When working with services responding to complaints, we encourage services to consider complaints issues in relation to the relevant mental health and wellbeing principle or principles, and this usually assists to reach effective outcomes that meet the needs of consumers and carers and maximizes the impact of the individual complainants. Secondly, it increases the likelihood of driving systemic change by supporting services to apply the mental health and wellbeing principles in their approach and practice when making decisions about provision of care and treatment to consumers. That also promotes continuous learning and improvement within services. And I'll give you a small example. Under the dignity and autonomy principle, our resolution team supports consumers, their carers and family and supporters to understand their rights under the Act and the Charter of Human Rights. The team also supports consumers and carers to understand how the mental health and wellbeing principle apply in practice at services, so they know what to expect and be able to navigate that with the service in a more efficient and effective way. The team uses the principles to guide conversations about complaints with consumers, carers, and services, and uses the principles also to guide conversations with services on reaching the best possible outcomes to these complaints. In part 3, the guidance gives a brief overview of, a few aspects of how the team encourages services to consider when managing or handling complaints from consumers, carers, and families, such as how the principles can be applied when handling a complaint in early resolution, fast tracking, and how the principles can also be applied when handling a complaint in formal resolution or through an investigation, when our approach or to further compliance can be applied, what good complaint handling looks like, and what is our approach to conducting systemic inquiries and reviews. So I do encourage you to read that section in details in the guidance. It's very informative, and if you have any questions, please come back to us. Thank you to many of you in the audience today who have offered to work with us on our upcoming project, which is developing a set of complaints handling standards for the mental health and wellbeing services to be guided by. I'll hand over back to Ali now.
Next slide, please. Getting to the exciting bit for me, but anyway. Just waiting for, at my end, I'm waiting for this next slide, if it's possible. Excellent. So this is a little, just where do you find the information? This is your little, it's not really a flowchart, but anyway, full guidance has everything. So that's like the go-to. If you want summary guidance, and that includes, and the reason why that's really helpful is because it's 100, anyway, I'll go into more detail, but it's a big old guidance and the summary is only 30 pages. And so there are 1-page summary pages for each principle. Services might really find that really useful. And then where do you find resources to support leadership, quality and continuous improvement? In the implementation tool section of our website. So if we go to the next slide, I can talk more about how to access the guidance, because then I can get really, really excited. So you've probably all had seen the link, I'm hoping, in the chat. In the meantime, if you don't mind, I would kind of like to now stop the screen share of the PowerPoint so that I can have a little go myself in 2 seconds when oh, hang on one moment. I will do that shortly. I'm going to go here. It's going to say dismiss. It's not very exciting. I'm just going to play with my mouse and I'm going to go, here it is. Oh, look what I've done already. I've pre-searched guidance on our website. So the main web page, because I think you've all been given a shortcut, but if you come to the main page, there's 2 ways. You can go for information for services and it's there under guidance, or you can just literally go and search in the menu for guidance. I'm just going to do that now because I'm a hands-on person. And there it is. And the web page is great because these are fully accessible with screen readers. They have all the bookmarks that open. Any external website opens a new tab, and it's heavily bookmarked within it. We've also got a bit more about the background of the guidance. We have actually extracted, so for example, let's look at wellbeing of young people. We've extracted both here because sometimes you might be in a, so I just want to read that one principle. I don't want to have to read the whole document. You can just go here, and this is the full guidance on the wellbeing of young people. And again, this is, I don't know if people can give me a thumbs up to say, is that, do I need to increase the size of the font? Can people see that? Because I can do it like that. Is that better to read? So it tells you about the human rights and the what we were saying before, and related, also talks about related decision-making principles. I forgot to mention that. It also talks about why is this important? Because, you know, how might a consumer experience this principle? Well, when my health and wellbeing and autonomy as a child or young person are supported, I feel welcomed, safe, respected for who I am, including my culture, identity, gender, sexuality, disability, and lived and living experiences. And I'm involved, I'm just reading a couple because I love them. I'm involved in decisions about my care, treatment and recovery, and what matters to me is taken seriously. I'm supported to make the decisions I can make, recognising that I may be able to make more decisions as I get older and more mature, because obviously 12 to 24 is a big age range. My lived and living experience as a young person is valued, and I have opportunities to help improve services for others through youth advisory groups, interviews, projects, feedback sessions, and of course you can make complaints. And as carers, these if you're supporting care as well, and it talks about I feel respected and included as someone who cares deeply about the young person in my life. I see the young person I care for being listened to, included and supported in ways that are right for their development and identity. If the young person and I see things differently, I trust the service to support respectful two-way communication and supported decision making that prioritises the young person's needs. And now what's the difference, you might ask? So I'm going to go and hit the, here we go, hit the back button. Here we go, hitting the back button. Oh, here we go, this is where it all goes. So hitting the back button, here, if I go into what is the difference between the one-page summary, so it's all on one page, so it tells you what's the actual wording of the principle is in the breakout box, and then it talks about what you should be doing, and see here it talks about respect and value diverse identities and experience of Aboriginal children and young people, and there's a link. This won't necessarily work in this website because this is from the full guidance, so cultural safety has full guidance on it, so they're interlinked with it. I'll show you when I get to the guidance. And then you've got your little book icons, and I'll just see if I can blow this up a bit more. So the little book items tell you, you must promote autonomy and decision making. You have involve families, carers and kin, prevent and mitigate risks. Value young people's living experience. You can also find out a whole lot of ways to do that in the lived experience principle. And now, she says, I'm going to go back there. I'm going to close that down, and you've got the implementation resources here as well. So there's the leadership self-assessment checklist. We've mapped the principles to this yes, and they're just, you can download, and there they are, and the training matrix. And now she says, I'm going to go into the actual guidance, which is just amazingly awesome. So here's the actual guidance, and the first thing I can say, it's screen reader accessible, etc. But look, if I click on the bookmark, that's where the detailed table of contents. So for people who really want to know all the different headings, you click down there and you can go, oh, what do they mean by minimise searches and belongings? It'll take you to dignity and autonomy, take you straight into that section. The other way you can do it is I'll just close the bookmark, go back to here. As you can see, it's 160 pages, but it's not really 160, it's about 148. This you can click from anywhere on this page to anywhere in the document. You can also, I'm just going slowly because I know I talk fast. You may also use these, this is an interactive, so I can go, let's have a look at cultural safety. And they've all been, I shouldn't say colour-coded, but we've made each, they stand out more when we're trying to make it so that it's inviting. And I'm just going to see if I can make this a bit bigger too. So cultural safety comes in two parts. Firstly, because it's cultural safety for everyone, there's general information about the Act and the relevant guidance. Then we talk about human rights, APRA's definition as well, specific for First Nations. Then we talk about how consumers, statements for consumers and carers. Then how do treating teams put this in practice? And it comes in two parts. Part A of this principle for treating teams is specific for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders communities, and Part B's general guidance about creating a warmer, welcoming environment and actively asking and responding to everyone's identity and culture. And these bookmarks work like this. You can go, oh, what's learn from? And it'll take you into the relevant parts of the principle. So I just love this document. But anyway, maybe I'm just in love with all the colours. Oh, and we also have, look what I've come back to here. This is a flow chart, and this is helpful because this talks you through. Earlier on, there's Alex, but this is showing how you can also see a systemic example in how you would consider the principles. And this one's about changing a visiting hours at a service. So yeah, I'm very excited about that. I could just talk to myself all day long. And there's a really good section on leadership. And we are aligned to, we're using all of the relevant frameworks such as our Workforce, Our Future, the Victorian Safety Guide. You'll find everything that we've used is here. And in section 4 is the appendices. It's a long list of resources. And now I'm just going to go and look, I can click down here and I can look at the summary. And the summary, it also has bookmarks. So again, it has a comprehensive summary of part 1 from the full guidance. And then if you go down to number 6 is where you can see, for example, families and carers. And again, it shows you, I'm just blowing up the text again because I'm not good at that. Consistently and inclusively identify carers, explore how the consumer would like to involve their carer, family supporter or kin, proactively involve families and carers. If we go to, I'm going to say dignity and autonomy is one of my favourite. Ask people, oh, I have to blow it up again. Again, it's about asking people if they need support to understand information and rights. So, because we've also highlighted in the summary that, you know, dignity and autonomy and support decision making, they pretty much cover, you always using those ones. And it talks about things like promote and protect privacy and support the right to ask for amendment of a health record or make a health information statement, promote positive feedback cultures, and least restrictive also talks about, so in here, I'll have to blow it up. Anyway, load up again. In here, it will link you to the other related principles, such as supported decision making, dignity and autonomy, and you can click on those, and they, because there's a lot, sometimes it might seem a little bit repetitious, but that's because they do intersect. So many of these principles intersect. It's good to know everything you can do to help people have really great experiences, because, you know, when we use these principles well, everybody is improving the system and hopefully reducing restrictive interventions. Thank you for being the champions. I'm now going to stop sharing. I think I've, oh my God, the time's getting by. Sorry, everybody, I'm possibly running over time. And I think according to my, watch me move, look, watch me, back to the screen share. So I think there's some questions in the chat. I'm just...
Ali, there's one question or a comment in the chat. So this is from Mandy. I'm hoping you'll provide some guidance about how to document the critical thinking in a logical and flowing way, as this is an area which is really challenging and can be overwhelming for the writer. I might just have a stab at answering that one. Ali, you've frozen again for me, so I'll have a go at answering this. I think one way to do that is to follow the steps in the flowchart, but it's also a fabulous idea for an implementation resource. And as Ali mentioned, we've got a complex scenario that we're going to upload. You're back there, Ali. We can hear you again.
Sorry, it just died. Now I'm using my Telstra modem. Sorry.
No worries. But that complex scenario that we're going to upload, we can include a sort of a specific example of what that might look like. So that's fabulous. Thank you. I don't think there's any other questions in the chat at this point, Ali.
Ah, awesome. Does that mean that... Thank you everyone who's joined us today, because it looks like there's questions and maybe a thank you. It's been really lovely to see so many people take time to come and join us on this webinar, because you are the champions, and we really appreciate all the work that you're going to do in carrying this work forward and using the guidance and the summary, and to let you all know, we mentioned it earlier, there should be a feedback link on the webinar. It's going to go in the chat if it hasn't already. And there will also be a follow-up survey, probably in about 1 to more like 2 months. We know it's a lot. So we want to give you the time to actually have the time to look at it, test it, use it, try the implementation tools, see what's been really useful. If you see things that you want to tell us some more information or suggest things, that's what we'll be looking for, the feedback about our guidance, the website, the implementation tools. We're going to send you another survey in a couple of months, but we hope you can fill in a survey today. We'll send out the slides. Happy days, next week, and a link to the webinar survey. But any final words from Jackie or Maggie?
Congratulations to everyone who's been involved, particularly those in the audience who've been our critical friends. It's been an amazing co-designed, thoughtful process, and we are just so proud to be able to share this with everyone today.
Yes, and I'll reiterate that.
Thanks,
very proud
Jackie.
of our team, very proud of everyone who's participated and partnered with us. It's been fantastic. And I hope you get a lot of use of the guidance. I'm sure you will, and consumers and carers will benefit greatly.
Thank you, everyone. Does that mean I'm scared I'm going to drop out again twice in one session? Is a bit tricky. Oh, thank you, everyone. Oh, that's heartwarming, but especially thank you to all of you, because I know how hard we've been working, getting different versions and rethinking it, redrafting it. It's been really great work, and so much patience with all the people who have been supporting us through this work. It's I'm pretty proud of it, I'll be honest. So, oh, thanks everyone. I'd blush if I could.
Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.